Hello and welcome to Cricket8 Podcast. There's a lot happening in the cricketing world and a lot happening here as well. And that's why Jarrod is smirking at the moment. Welcome, Jarrod. Let's hit the point straight away. India's lineup, we're pretty sure about that almost. But what does the batting order look like?
I thought we were going to talk about the fact you just locked yourself out of your house. But isn't it great? We'll just go in and we'll talk about the cricket instead. It looks like Rohit Sharma's going to move in the batting order, which is fascinating because I think a lot of us thought that was the sensible decision, but it's not really how cricket teams play all that much. You know, people get locked into batting positions and they've thought about it. It's really interesting. There's a comment here. Let's see if I can find it. Vignesh says, Rohit is lit in opening, but not at number 6. I could be wrong here, but look at the numbers. But Rohit, doesn't he do okay also batting at number 6 in Test match cricket where he averages 54? So
Sample size?
What's that? 16 Test matches. So if he bats at number 6, there isn't going to be an issue. He's struggled a little bit more at number 5, which might be what he's talking about. He's still, if you look at those two combined averages, it's still higher probably than what KL Rahul is going to be able to do. I think if you want to get the most out of the batting order and they're going to keep KL Rahul, then it makes sense for KL to open. And that's why I think a lot of us was suggesting that. There's no issue if they want to go the other way. Senior batter wants to come back in and play their position. I think that's more than fine. I personally believe that Rohit Sharma is a better player now than he was when he was struggling in Test cricket. And he could have come into any position and been successful. Opening just happened to be the position that he was on. So I wouldn't be as focused on that as other people are, but I know a lot of other people do from that point of view.
So, what's the conditions? It being pink ball test and then fair bit of movement up front. From that point of view, where do you think India should position Rohit? Rohit should position himself, and if the openers, particularly Rahul, is best equipped to handle it.
I mean, if I'm Rohit Sharma, I probably think that the pink ball might nip around a bit early, so it might be better off for me not to be at the top of the order. So I could see that. Look, I don't think it's a case of either of them being more suited to the pink ball because it's not something that either of them have faced all that much. So you know, I've got no issue with him with either of them doing that. These are low-scoring tests. So in a low-scoring test, it can go both ways. You either want the guy who's going to knock it around for ages and try and get his eye in, or you want the opposite of that, right? And you want the guy who's going to score quickly. So it depends on how you look at modern cricket. But if you've got Jaiswal at the other end, I always think that Jaiswal and KL Rahul is the best partnership because you have one guy who's probably going to leave the ball quite a lot and try and get his eye in before he starts to score. And then at the other end, you've got a guy who's going to slash you away for a bunch of boundaries and take you on. So I don't mind that partnership at all. And if it gets slightly more out of it, the one thing we know about the pink ball test and Adelaide in general is that the ball moves around there quite a lot under the pink ball games. I don't know if I have the average off the top of my head, but I think the average in those games is about 23, 24 runs per wicket, which is incredibly low. You know, it's very, very different to everywhere else. So it's not exactly a similar situation. And Adelaide Oval, the wicket has changed from the old days when India used to do really well there. It was a wicket that favoured spin. It was a batting friendly surface. It is no longer either of those two things. It is now a seam bowling surface where they put more grass on it. And I just did a podcast with Phil Jakes, and he was sort of saying that like Adelaide is probably the wicket that's changed the most in Australia. You then throw the pink ball on top of it, and it can be very, very different as well. Keshav says, is batting at 6 in pink ball as easy as red ball because of twilight and the new ball by the time number 6 walks in? Really important to remember that like, I think a lot of people get really fixated with the pink ball and when you come into bat, batting at twilight, weirdly enough, quite often can be the easiest time to bat. In that middle session, that sort of afternoon session when it's kind of half light, quite often that's when the most runs have been scored in those games. So there, you don't know. Like I think everyone goes, oh, okay. Everyone thinks about the first innings. So in the first innings, you come out early and you bat in the daytime, then you got the afternoon, then you got the night, right? Well, what if a team's bowled out for 150 and you have to face the new ball under lights or whatever it may be? So it doesn't quite work, I think, the way that people believe it works. It's a much more complicated thing than that. But if you want to know if batting at number 6 with a pink ball is as easy as red ball, it isn't, because as I just said, the batting average with the red ball is about 5 or 6 runs higher than it is with a pink ball. So in general, It is much harder to bat with a pink ball than it is with a red ball at the moment.
India made its fair bit of contribution to that average as well with that 36 all out. But which period are you referring to when you say that it helped batting, it helped the spinners? Was it 2000s or even before that?
So the whole history of the Adelaide Oval, it's been known as a batting wicket pretty much from the beginning of Test cricket, and it's one of the earlier Test venues. It's always been quite a flat surface. They were always quite proud of that in Adelaide, that they had, one of the greatest batting wickets in the world. And then it starts to change when they start using drop-in pitches, which is something that is kind of unfortunate in Australia, but also a necessity with the amount of Aussie rules football that can be played there and everything else. So once they start doing that, but they've made some choices as well. You can have drop-in pitches that are quite good for batting, but they tend to be quite boring. At least with the old Adelaide Oval, it was still quite nice to watch the ball come onto the bat. Drop-in pitches can be a little bit just boring pitches. And so the MCG and Adelaide Oval have decided to put more grass on it. By putting more grass on, it doesn't crack the way, or not that it cracked in Adelaide, but it doesn't break up the way it used to in Adelaide. And so, yeah, it's probably been... It is hard to tell, Megha, because you'd have to go back to Shield cricket because we've had so many day-night games in Adelaide. We don't know how many of these are just the pink ball darting around. But my guess is it's probably been about 5 or 6 years now where it's gone from being the pitch that every batter in the world says they want to bat on to one where you're just like, I'm not sure this one's for me.
Well, getting Jarrod to talk about history is one of our favorite things on this show. Now, there's this question around Australia struggling less at Adelaide when it comes to pink ball tests. I'd quickly dig up that question. Is it down to the wicket or what is it about? As you answer that question, I dig it up.
What was the question exactly? Sorry, you just cut out
So
for me. For a second.
Keshav, what he says is why Australia struggle in pink ball test at Gabba, but not really at Adelaide.
I wouldn't worry all that much about it. I think the two Gabba results were a bit fluky. So they won one of them at the Gabba, but it was after, I think it was Asad Shafiq put on an incredible 8th wicket or 9th wicket partnership that got them a little bit nervous. And the next one was Shimar Joseph, who kind of came from nowhere and went through them. So I wouldn't worry about that. I think in general, Australia's probably also been a little bit lucky to win as many of the Adelaide games as they have, because low-scoring games bring in the opposition. I mean, ask India about those sorts of things, right? Like if the minute you bring in a low-scoring game, you only need one outlier performance from the opposition, and they've probably been lucky to not have that against them in Adelaide the way that they could have. So that's why I always thought that Australia should always go in favourites for the Adelaide game, but I don't think we should be that surprised if they lose one either, especially against a good side.
There's this question about Australian bowling attack now. Sid says he's looking forward to what Cummins will do. His recent form is kind of alarming. Now, would that be a correct statement, his recent form? Because we've not seen enough of him recently. He took a long break and prepared specifically for this test series. Looked a little rusted. Is that the term that you'd use as well, rusted? Or do you think he's well prepared and it's just...
Yeah, no, I think that's probably fair. Look, his recent form is alarming for him, right? I don't think his recent form would be alarming for like a normal human being. So in his last 17 tests, he's averaging about 28 in test cricket, right? Like that, there's nothing wrong with that. The issue is that he was averaging about 19 in test cricket for about 5 years prior to that, right? So that's quite a big jump. But as you said, I thought he looked a little bit rusty. I didn't think he could hit his length naturally in Perth, which is something that he's a really accurate bowler. Like it's very rare for him not to bowl good line or good lengths. So I did think that there was some issues there with his bowling. Having said that, I would assume he would come back and bowl better. But I think it's a big issue for Australia that the bowler who bowled the best in the first test is not available. I thought Stark had good rhythm but didn't take a lot of wickets, putting the pink ball in his hand. I think he averages 19 with the pink ball and 32 or something with the red ball in test cricket. So if he comes back and Cummins finds his form again, it's not as much of an issue with Hazlewood. But at the moment, outside of Bumrah, Hazlewood is probably the best test bowler in the world. Hazlewood's probably on a similar level to Rabada, right, at the moment. Okay. I'm not sure I'd have him ahead of Rabada. But to drop that player out of your team that's a thing. And like a lot of people are like, oh, Scott Boland's a good replacement. Yeah, he is. But Hazlewood was averaging like 13 in test cricket this year. You know, you can't replace that.
Blessing in disguise, maybe. But I'm already thinking reels when I ask this question. So Bumrah at the top, Hazelwood and Rabada at the same level. How are you enlisting those names?
Yeah, I think you would pick. I think not that long ago you would have had Bumrah and Cummins, and you might have had Cummins slightly ahead of Bumrah just because he played a lot more Test cricket. I don't think. Well, even if the fact that Cummins has slipped off, I think Bumrah's played enough Test cricket now that isn't an argument anymore. Rabada in Bangladesh was special. Bangladesh had just gone to West Indies and won a Test match. They won a series in Pakistan, and he made their batters at home look irrelevant. So there's certainly, I think, that's something we maybe haven't seen from Cummins in a while, going to an Asian country and just ripping through. And then Hazelwood's been fantastic. If you just look at, I don't know, what would it be, the last 12 months, I think all three of them have been in incredible form. And, I think you pick Bumrah first, and I would probably go with, I'm just trying to find Rabada's average. Yeah, Rabada's average a little bit more, but because he did some of that in Bangladesh, I'm pretty happy. But Bumrah's averaging 15.39. Hazelwood is averaging 14.82. And then you've got Rabada at 15.19. And Matt Henry's at 16.8. There's a lot of bowlers on a bit of a tear this year when it comes to it. Like that, there's quite a few of those guys. So I think if you're picking at the moment, you would probably have Henry ahead of Cummins, based on the fact that Cummins has been struggling a little bit. So you'd probably go Bumrah, Rabada, Hazelwood, Henry, and then and that shows you not that long ago Cummins was at the top of that list. Like, it's been a slide for him, right?
It takes me longer to settle my mic than it takes you to actually dig up those stats. There's a question by Ishit, and he says, will Bumrah cause more trouble with the pink ball? Does it give any sort of advantage to Bumrah with his action, with his lengths?
Shouldn't Ishit be worrying about our sound control and not sending comments through? Why are you putting up messages from the producer? Come on now. Yeah, so the pink ball, I mean, it averages 5 or 6 runs less than the red ball, pretty much right across the board, but certainly in Australia. So you generally expect it to be a bowling heavy test, and he's a bowler, so that would be fine. The pink ball could be weird because there are periods where it feels like it's impossible to play, and there are other periods where it feels like it's very soft. It goes very soft and very easy. So it's very much like the white ball in some ways, in that, when it's hard and the conditions are in its favor. Do you remember some of those spells that, like, Mohammad Siraj was bowling in the World Cup in India? Where you're just like, my God, how you play him? And then the ball just goes flat, but you're all out by that stage and it doesn't matter. The pink ball is a bit the same. So you can have a team like 25 for 5 and think, oh, they're going to be rolled here, and then the ball goes a bit soft and people go through. So it should help Bumrah because he's bowler in that kind of way. And the other thing that's weird about the pink ball is, because of the conditions of day-night cricket, you sometimes get the ball nibbling around sort of in both directions, and a little bit more under lights. And I think that if you check Hawkeye data, you'll see that. But you also sometimes see it skid through a little bit more. So if you think of when you're watching like a T20 game where the first innings is played under the sun and the second game is played under the lights, that's essentially what can happen. And it's not consistent. Sometimes it seems more, sometimes it swings more, sometimes it skids more. And so all of those are advantages to the bowler, but you don't really know. If it skids more, Bumrah should be unplayable. If it seems or swings more, he doesn't have as big an advantage because everyone's going to have that same advantage at that point. But if it's specifically skidding, I think that really does help him.
By the way, I don't want to be muted by the producer, so I have to take his questions. Keshav is talking about Akash Deep. Do you see him getting a look in this game ahead of Rana? But with the sort of attitude and overall debut performance that Rana came with, would it be fair to rest him, drop him, whatever the term?
I mean, I think some of it would just depend on what they've seen of the two of them bowling with the pink ball, right? Like if you've been watching them, you should have a pretty good idea of which one you think will do better with it. So that I would probably make my decision based on that. having watched Akashdeep and having watched a lot of pink ball games in Australia, I would have thought he is probably more suited, whereas Rana is probably more suited when we get to Melbourne and Brisbane, those and Sydney. So I would think that this could be the one test that Akashdeep might be the most suited. So I could see why someone might go with him for this particular location.
Interesting. And now we shall turn our attention to Australia's batting. Labuschagne, relate, chill, and enjoy is drawing our attention to it. How many tests does he get? If he keeps falling like this, his average this year has been around 20, and the last few tests it has decreased further. Even last year, he averaged around 34, but before that, the numbers were colossal. So from there to now, and the rut that has come in, how do you see him coming out of it? By over practicing?
I mean, he's a huge trainer. I remember when I used to cover the team and follow around, like he'd be in the nets all the way through. I doubt he's gone away from hanging around in the nets. Like I would almost have done the opposite. I think I would have said to him, look, why don't you because there was a week's break, right? And the third test, is the third test Melbourne? Am I getting my dates right there? Or is the third test? Yeah. Oh my God, I've forgotten when all the dates are. But if you miss this test, you get at least a 2-week break off the top of my head. Yeah. So I would have thought the best option would have been to say to him, don't play in this one. Go and get your head right. Work out what you think's not working. Then come back to us. We'll pick someone else and we'll be absolutely fine. The problem with that is that they've got a guy who's batting at number 3. Opening the batting, who is probably a number 4 or number 5 in Test cricket. So he didn't look like making a single run in the first test in McSweeney. So if you drop Marnus at the moment, you might be in a situation where you have to drop McSweeney from the third test. And I think that's the issue that they're having. So I know Constance has made runs again. You know, chances are that he will struggle because he's a young player, a very young player. I don't expect him to come in and suddenly average 40 in this series. Doesn't mean he couldn't come in and have a good innings, or maybe even averaging 30 might help Australia here at the moment, right? But I don't think he's going to come in and star straight away. But at the moment, Constance is going to have to replace 2 players, right? Yeah. So he might have to open and he might have to play at first drop. So that's the issue with dropping Marnus. And that's where they've found themselves. And there's no easy answer for that.
Also, do you think had it been England, they would have promoted, say, a player with less than 10 first-class matches? In case of Australia, conventionally as well, and even now, the thinking is that the player should have enough matches under their belt. For example, even from India's point of view, Rana hadn't played a fair bit of Test first-class cricket before he got a look in. So do you think the difference in the way they approach selection, it's down to that?
No, not entirely. I think if you ask them, they believe that McSweeney was the most informed top order player in the country. I think they went with form rather than anything else. My issue is that I don't think he is a top order player. So that a lot of his runs in his form has actually come from batting slightly down the order. So that would be my issue with that comment. And they're putting him in. I do think that Australia has become, over the last little while, they trust their system a lot more than I think India and England do, and that most countries do. So a lot of countries will pick a player in from everywhere else, whereas Australia's like, no, you have to be successful in the system to prove that you can be good at Test level. And if you look at the history of Australian cricket, they've proved that again and again, right? The issue here is that Khawaja's stopped making runs, Marnus has stopped making runs, and Warner had retired. And so maybe what they were thinking is, well, let's bring the slightly more senior player in McSweeney. And I think the difference between McSweeney and Constance is probably, it's about 5 years in age. But if you look at McSweeney play, I think he knows what kind of player he is. He knows exactly who he is. There aren't many 19-year-olds who aren't Sachin Tendulkar or Jaiswal who know who they are at 19, right? Not saying he can't bat, but he doesn't know who he is as a human being at the moment, and he doesn't quite know who he is as a cricketer, is probably my guess, right? Unless he's a freak, and I don't know enough about him to know whether he's just one of those rare freaks. So I think they looked at it, they went, this other guy's in form, he's a little bit older, we know he's a really good fielder, let's bring him in and put him in that position. The issue is if you're not a top order player and then you have to open the batting against Bumrah, he's going to expose those weaknesses. And I think that's what we saw with McSweeney. So, yeah, maybe some other countries would have gone with it. But I think those are the two best young batting prospects in the country. Like, it's not like they picked Rob Quiney. Like, they didn't pick like a 29-year-old who's been around for ages. Like, the safe pick, really, would have been Bancroft or Harris, right? I think the correct pick probably is still Renshaw, but he was in horrendous form, and so they probably felt a little bit nervous there. So in some cases, there is no right answer. The truth is, Megha, that none of these players should be playing in this series at the moment, right? No one's making runs at the top order of Australian Shield teams. No one's making runs for the Test team. That's the situation that they're in.
The form meter has been pretty weird for all of these contenders because some of them started off on a high and then it all fizzled off suddenly. So must have been very difficult. And that's why we saw such intense coverage of who could be the potential contender replacing Warner at the top after his retirement. Now, Sid has a question on Marsh. He says, is he overrated? But in the last couple of years, since he made a comeback in the Ashes, he's the only one averaging over 40 in Australia because all other batters are struggling. So beyond what he can contribute with the ball, as a batter in the middle order with other contenders struggling, do you think this question might be slightly harsh?
I think there was a period of time when Mitch Marsh had the lowest batting average of any number 6 in the history of the game. I can't remember how many tests, but, a minimum amount of tests. And what happened was that some of that has still stuck to Mitch Marsh, and that's probably what Sid's question is about, right? Of at that stage. But if you look at the last 2 years, in it total, he is actually making runs for this team. I thought he was one of the strengths coming in of this side. I think he's a very good number 6. He's obviously, you say he's overrated. He probably had one of the better innings for Australia in the first test, and he got important wickets for them as well when Cummins wasn't bowling particularly well. Mitch Marsh outbowled Cummins, right? Like that's a thing that we actually saw. So yeah, I think with Mitch Marsh, he's still a flawed player. I don't think he's ever going to be the complete market, but people don't like bowling to him. I can tell you that now for a fact. Opposition teams don't like bowling to him because he's a bit of a monster on length. So if he doesn't seem to notice line all that much, so you can trap him around the crease. But if you slightly overpitch, he's so big and powerful, he whacks the ball back past you. So you have to be careful. And if you try and be too conservative and go a little bit short into the wicket, he can pull anything. So I can tell you this for a fact. But it's like it doesn't really matter, where we come on him. He's one of the few informed batters that Australia has at the moment, and he certainly has a big impact from that point of view. I see Varun's saying he's the only Aussie batter averaging 40 in his last 20 innings. Like that's what he is at the moment. He's the guy who's been making runs. I thought he looked okay, and when that pitch was starting to crack up when he came out to bat, I thought he looked okay in that last innings, considering that as well. I think it would have been a huge problem for Australia to lose Marsh and Hazelwood after that first test.
There's another interesting comment here. Amit says, and obviously you can give us the exact figures. Marsh's Pakistan bully, take out his stats versus other nation, and he's averaging less than 30. And Jarrod is already on it to find out what exactly he averages against other teams. Now,
he averages 47. He averages 47 against England. Like, he actually averages more against England than he does against Pakistan, right? Yes, if you take out what he averages against Pakistan and England, he struggled. But remember that he has, over a long period of time, he was in the side when he wasn't very good. So he's going to have positions, averages and everything else where he doesn't do very well. But Megha, I thought you wanted to take a break at the 15 or 20 minute mark.
Well, I wanted to, but I needed a reminder. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Did you lock yourself out of the breaks?
Yeah, out of the breaks as well. I didn't want it to be disrupted. You were in flow. Anyway, we'd head to this break with this grand announcement. Which ad would you want, Jarrod? Now, let me ask you this question as well. First, third, 7, we have so many of these creative ads. Pick a random number.
I would just pick one. I pick
Come to cricket8.com to spin the wheel as we start to launch our free fun cricket games. There are prizes to be won for the top spinners, and you can also stick around for all the live scorecards and all of our content.
Well, you picked and I pressed before you could make your choice clear. In the meanwhile, there have been multiple comments that I've collected over here. Priyesh feels Australia might should have had a second spinner in case they feel comfortable spinning India in the web. In Australia, in those conditions where India themselves are resting the likes of Jadeja and Ashwin.
I don't think there's a wicket in Australia now that you would bowl a second spinner, honestly. As I said before, I just got off another podcast with Phil Jakes, who was New South Wales coach, so knows the SCG really well, and he was just saying it doesn't spin there anymore. He said the same about Adelaide Oval. MCG was one where you could sometimes pick a second spinner. It's really become a seam heavy country. The pitches they're not like South African pitches, but they are in the teams that you pick. Well, certainly not like current South African pitches because they do spin. But if you look at a couple of years ago, they kind of are behaving like those, like the older sort of South African wickets, where it's not so much that spinners don't do well. It's that how do you give the ball to a spinner when your seamers are taking so many wickets? Do you know what I mean? Like, you might go to one spinner just to see, and we've seen Jayasuriya be handy for Sri Lanka at times, and Keshav Maharaj has done really well. But quite often, it's just how do you get the ball to that second spinner? There are certain wickets within South Africa now that have started to spin more, whereas Australia's gone back to what South Africa used to be like, where it's like, it's not that a spinner wouldn't get a wicket, it's just that they won't get a wicket as quickly as a seam bowler, so what's the point of giving it to them? So you have the spinner there for certain matchups and to give people rest and rotation, but the second spinner, and it isn't a situation where Australia would have a second spinner, they would lose a seamer, right? Then you would be going in with a 4-person bowling attack. Mitch Marsh would have to be the third seamer. He's already got injured after bowling once. He's bowled.
17.
Mitch Marsh has bowled. He's bowled twice in
17 in total, and then there were 4 overs in that ODI, after which he again got a niggle.
Since the IPL.
Yeah.
So he bowled in the IPL, got injured, bowled 4 overs in that ODI, or 5 overs, whatever you said there, and then the 17 in this game, right? And he got injured again. So the last 3 times that he's bowled, as far as I'm aware, he's got injured. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. It's like, so do you want him to be your third seamer? No, you can't have that. So it doesn't make sense for Australia at all. I don't think it really makes a lot of sense on Australian pitches. That might be different if you get really hot wickets, really, really hot conditions under the sun when they get to Sydney and Melbourne. But I don't think so, because watching cricket in Shield cricket at the moment, it feels like seam bowlers are just dominating.
And also the second spinner that Australia can come up with, does that spinner bring that quality? But coming back to the Pacers, there's a question around Boland, and Vignesh is presenting this question. Does he feel undercooked? So he had this injury issue. He was making a comeback, didn't play a whole lot of games. Whatever games he played, the figures weren't that impressive. And now coming to this Prime Minister 11 game, what would you make out of it all?
Yeah, no, I think he is. I don't think anyone. I think he would agree with that, and so would Cricket Australia. But they don't. There's a couple of other choices that it might have had. Like, I don't know. Let's say I forgot his name. Michael Nisa and Jai Richardson were 2 other options, I suppose. But I think they're both injured. Certainly Nisa is anyway. So what do? Boland is fit, and he is a test quality bowler, right? And it's probably not a bad test match to play in, even if you're not completely cooked, because it shouldn't be a test match where the opposition makes 400. So even if the opposition beat you around, it's not like you'll be in a situation where you can be as exploited as you might be on a really good batting pitch. So, but yeah, no, he's definitely undercooked. That's why he played. The only reason he played in that Prime Minister's 11 was they needed to get some more overs under him. I don't think he was going all the way through with his I don't think he was trying at full pace or anything in that game either. He was just working his way through.
Interesting. There's a question on Siraj, and that's from Soham. Do you think
it's not just a question, it's a super chat, Megha.
That's the reason why. Okay, we didn't prioritize it because it was super chat. It is just a very pertinent question. But yeah, Siraj and his numbers, we saw how they were in India. He was struggling, but then come Australia, his figures dramatically improved. Although the sample size is small, it's just one test that we're talking about. Do you see him faring better just because of the skill sets that he brings and the conditions that may be on offer?
I mean, we've seen him under lights at times become a bowler that no one in the world can hit. He has every opportunity of doing that here as well. He might not bowl under lights. I know that sounds weird. He might not bowl with a new ball, like under lights when he needs to. He might not bowl with a hard ball under lights when he needs to. But if he gets a new ball under lights, I think it should suit the kind of bowler that he is based on everything we've seen. My only issue is that he's a rhythm bowler and he was in great rhythm in Perth. He's not very good at backing that up test after test, and there's been a bit of a gap here. That would be my only caveat. But yeah, there isn't a bowler in this test match, right? No matter who you pick, that isn't going to be better with a pink ball than with a red ball, unless the conditions go against them or they bowl terribly. Like, the average is lower. It's better for every single bowler.
Or do they get overwhelmed and try too many things and it...
Yeah. I mean, you might get something like that. That's what I mean. That's bowling badly, though, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? If everyone bowls where they should be and how they should, there's a reason why India were bowled out for 36, right? It's when the conditions help with that pink ball, it's really, really hard to bat. And then the opposite happens. When the ball gets soft and flat, and if the pitch is nice, it's really hard to get wickets. Like, pink ball games are quite often games of extremes based on the time that you're playing and the hardness of the ball, in way more so than even a red ball game.
So that 36 all out, would you attribute it to conditions? Because the time of the day when they were batting, the conditions weren't really lethal.
What do you mean by the conditions were lethal?
The twilight narrative and it being really difficult to side the ball.
It's not just about the twilight, though, is it? It was a brand new ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the wicket was reactive. Like, there was little bits of seam movement consistently. Pat Cummins was bowling like a god. And so, yeah, it was, that's what I mean. I think we focus too much on the lights versus not the lights. That pink ball can be just as deadly during the day. The bowling average in the first session, from memory, is very similar to the bowling average under lights. No one ever talks about that. The first session and the third sessions are very similar. So it can be deadly at any time, right? And it can be not deadly at any time. We've seen lots of people we just talked about Asad Shafiq. I know that was at the Gabba, but I watched him bat for about 19 hours with a tail ender, where I was like, I don't know how they're going to get him out. This ball's gone soft, and that was dark. I was Gabba. It was like 2 a.m. in the morning when that day finished, Megha. Like, I remember coming out of the ground and we were all in tears at how late it was. Like, so I've seen plenty of runs under lights as well. So it does depend on the state of the ball, the state of the pitch, and then what the pitch does. It's not just turn the lights on and you can't bat.
Of the 1,000 reasons, you chose this reason to cry because the game got over really late.
Oh,
Anyways,
yeah, in Brisbane, I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to find, it was really late because they had extended by half an hour. I think there was already the half an hour. Like, it was just, everything was shut in Brisbane when we came out of that ground. It was like you couldn't do anything. It was awful.
You had to walk your way back home or the hotel.
I had to walk around to the other side of Wollongabba. Yeah, I probably only had a 10-minute walk. I really like Wollongabba.
Interesting. Sanket, having picked up from what you suggested, it's not just about the conditions in the twilight, it's about the ball. He's referring to the lacquer, the thicker pink lacquer. He believes allows spin to come into play as well. And Ashwin is the probably best option among the three that India has. Reddy is good enough to bat at 7. He is seeking your thoughts.
Yeah, the pink lacquer changes the kinds of bowlers you want. I can't see any reason why it wouldn't also help the other two spinners, though. Anyone who can skid the ball on generally can do something with the pink lacquer. So that works fine. I don't think there's a reason not to bowl any of the Indian spinners from that. Reddy is good enough to bat at number 7. Yes, I think he is, but I don't think they need to make that change at the moment because they've got Jadeja at 7 or Washington at 7 available to them. So if you can get him to bat at 8 for a little while and get himself in, but I think he'll eventually bat at 7. I think that will be his spot.
No, this isn't a question. It is a super chat, as Jarrod just informed us earlier regarding the other question. Now, ping ball cause of the lacquer doesn't get old as quickly and is harder to reverse. Given Bumrah is better with the old ball, is that a disadvantage? Is what Soham is asking.
So that isn't just so the lacquer on the new Kookaburra balls is also longer lasting and doesn't get old as quickly. So if you have a look at that Wacker game, you could see the logo on the ball way longer than you normally would be able to. And I think might have been the Sri Lanka South Africa test was another one where like that logo just wasn't coming off the ball. So the amount of lacquer that Kookaburra are putting on is actually stopping the ball getting its old as quickly. And how did Bumrah go at the Wacker? Like he still went okay. It didn't seem to provide him with any disadvantage. Pink ball slightly different, but you're right. Again, it has a lot of lacquer on it. The difference with the pink ball for someone like Bumrah is that when the lacquer comes off, the ball just gets really soft. Whereas with the red ball, the lacquer can come off and it slowly gets soft, and over time it would be an issue. So there is a point at which it kind of turns that ball. But yeah, I'm not. It's not going to be an issue because they're probably just going to take a lot of wickets. Both teams would be my guess, unless something miraculous happens. We've had lots of rain in Adelaide. We're expecting some grass on the wicket. The pink ball usually hums around sideways. I'm not sure I'm that concerned with old ball situations at the moment until I see this test play out.
And now can we turn our attention to South Africa versus Sri Lanka? South Africa having defeated whitewashed Bangladesh at home, really strengthened their contentions for the WTC finals. Before that, they had won the series against West Indies. West Indies, the first one being drawn. They won the second one. If they win this test and the remaining two against Pakistan, they do not have to rely on any other results. Do you see that happening, Jarrod?
Yes, I think that's pretty safe, isn't it? That's the direction it looks like going to me. Yeah, I thought Sri Lanka probably should have bowled them out for 140, 150 in that first test. They probably should have had them a few extra wickets down in this test that's currently going on at the moment. But also I thought, I don't think Sri Lanka will be able to overcome any of these totals anyway. It went tragically bad for Sri Lanka in that first test. But yes, no, I have very little faith in Pakistan or Sri Lanka beating South Africa in this series. So it'll be South Africa versus whoever in the final is my pick at the moment.
And with due respect to Pakistan, their abysmal record in Australia notwithstanding, it's even worse in South Africa because they've just won 2 tests.
That's kind of been the place they've been just horrendous. They've never really looked like working it out, even when they had good teams. So this isn't a good team. They're in a weird situation, all things considered. And so, yes, it's not looking likely that South Africa don't win all those tests. But this is one of the few at the moment anyway, unless Sri Lanka does something miraculous. This is one of the few times when we will have a situation where something normal might happen in Test cricket this year, right? Which South Africa might just win all 4 tests like we imagined, because everything else has been bizarre, crazy coconuts, right? So this does look at the moment like it should be normal, but I don't know. Pakistan could win the first test by like 10 wickets, and we'll all sitting there going, how did this happen? It's like, this is a weird year for Test cricket.
Absolutely. And you summed it up really well. Noor Hassan, there's super chat as well, but that doesn't accompany the question. This is a question. When you talked about Akash,
Yeah, so Noor, just so you know, Noor, if you just keep asking the same question over and over again, we're just not going to answer it. Ask it once, and if we're interested, we'll do it. Or you can do it as a super chat like you have now. But asking the same question over and over again. When you talked about Akash, should India go for both Akashdeep and Rana and drop Nitesh Reddy? Akash and Rana can both bat a little bit. We lose a bit in batting, but gain a lot more in bowling. Maybe. I just think in a test match where you're expecting the ball to move around quite violently, do you really want to be in a situation where you don't have that extra batting? And also, if this is probably the one test match where having someone who is a line and lengths merchant like Nitesh Reddy, he might be able to swing it around or nip it around quite consistently. He'll still be quite a handy bowler in those sorts of conditions. So I wouldn't. It's not for me, no, that one. But they might go that way. I mean, what are we calling it? Beer ball. That is the more attacking option, I think, is to bring in the extra bowler because, number 8, you're not always getting as much batting out of your number 8 anyway when you do those sorts of things.
Interesting. From India's point of view, though, it looks pretty complicated at the moment. If we go by what's there in the comment section, it looks pretty rosy because I don't want to bring these comments up. They'd rather want South Africa in the finals than Australia.
Yeah, I think that makes sense with South Africa's history. Also, South Africa's just developed a batting lineup that is working for them. I think you could make a pretty clear case for the fact that it's not as tried and tested. Even if you're saying it's currently performing better than Australia's batting lineup, you would probably prefer to go up against the South African batting lineup just because of the fragility that we've seen over a long period of time, even if it looks like it's working okay right now. So I think you make that. I think you make that call. Plus, Australia have won the World Test Championship before. For them, it's just another game. Whereas I think for South Africa, it is going to be absolutely huge, and the one issue I would say is at the moment, I think South Africa has more depth in their bowling and more variability in their bowling lineup. So perhaps they might be whereas you might be coming towards the end of Stark at his best. We don't know if Cummins is going to snap back, whereas we know that the South African bowling lineup looks pretty good right now.
Although a couple of injury issues might have just caused some headache for the South African management. Now, if they do not make it, how would they look back on that series against New Zealand? Because we see IPL being blamed for a fair bit of things, but SA20 was happening. Of course, New Zealand was not in a position to reschedule those tests. That's why they had to go ahead with the squad that wasn't that much high on experience. But if they do not make it, would SA20 be dragged into the conversation and the criticism?
Yes, but I mean, it's already been dragged into the conversation. All of us have talked about it. Yeah, like we've already said, it's kind of ridiculous. I think it's more ridiculous if they make the World Test Championship final, having given up one series in the middle of it, right? Like, it's hard enough to sell the World Test Championship, but if South Africa make the final and win it, everyone's going to be like, oh, come on. Like, if we're going to do this, let's do it properly. So maybe it's a good thing. I don't know. But I think it's more of an issue on that side than it is on this side. But I take your point.
And talking about Bumrah making a comeback and really leading from the front, because he's another person who gets criticized quite a lot, but he's looked absolutely solid. At least in the first test, he looked solid. And for him to be watching from the sidelines, his team doing so well without him, he did concede that it was nice to see the team doing well, but it was quite disheartening to not be a part of it, because he constantly has to prove that he's good enough for the team and the team needs him.
Yeah, I don't know if he does as much anymore. He had a good spell, didn't he, in the side. The part of the problem with Temba Bavuma is at times he's probably not been picked for the formats that he's been at his best at already for.
Yeah.
And so, there is certainly an issue there. He made runs again today. I thought he batted really well. And kind of allowed for Rickleton to bat the more defensive role, that's the sort of thing you want from your captain. So, I think it's a very big deal for South Africa to be making another final. And, that's why I suppose the banana skin thing is like, everyone's like, oh, they might lose in the final. The banana skin thing is that they somehow lose one of the next 3 tests, right? Or something else goes comically wrong and they don't end up in it. But they're a very good side at the moment because their inconsistencies before were the fact that they had a great bowling lineup, but they couldn't make enough runs. And now they look like they can make enough runs that their bowling lineup can consistently back it up. And, you look at people like Rabada and Marco Jansen and Maharaj, they're fantastic bowlers and they've got good backups that can come into the side at any stage. Like, they're not playing with Kotsia, Ngidi.
Yeah.
Who's the other one? Nokia at the moment, right? Like,
who's not available. And then Mulder as well getting injured.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably better. He's not inside, but that's a different thing. So, they're playing now with a centre with with backups, and I still expect them to do very well because the quality of the backups. I remember seeing Dane Patterson quite a few years ago and thinking that there was something within his bowling, but there's plenty of other guys that they could have brought in as well that they have available to them. There's many different options out there. That shows the depth, also the variety of the kinds of bowlers they have. Like you look at this lineup and they've got, who did I say it was? It was Marco Janssen, so left arm tall. You got Maharaj, left arm finger spin. You got Rabada hitting the deck, and Patterson will probably pitch it up a little bit more generally, right? It's not just that they have different, a lot of bowling talent. They have very different kinds of bowling talent. You know, they have Maharaj, but they also have the two off spinners that are very good as well. Like, you know, they have big tall fast bowlers, they have skiddier fast bowlers. They really do have an incredible collection of different kinds of bowlers coming through. And then even William Muller, I don't think he's a long-term test prospect, but he's a handy player to have again in that lineup and gives them a little bit of extra batting. Like, there's just a lot going on there.
And a collection of final appearances as well. Women's T20 World Cup 2023, 2024 Men's T20 World Cup, and again, very recently Women's World Cup as well. In the meanwhile, we probably were equidistant from the start and the end when it came to our break, so it worked out pretty fine in the end. Shall we time our conclusion well and sign it off now?
Done.
All right, done. Thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to your comments and observations and feedbacks to the video. And remember to sign up to cricket8.com. There are a lot of fun games. Make sure you are a part and you're having fun there. Thank you so much for joining once again. Goodbye and take care.
Remember to support us by subscribing and sharing, but also signing up at cricket8.com, where live scorecards cover 8,000 matches a year with advanced visual details that tell you who is actually in front in the game.